beyond the historical context. Let's just talk about it as far as writing and art.
I think it holds up really well. It seems very fresh. It seems like it could have come out this year.
Sure.
My favorite sequence is when at the beginning there's several pages that are like a 1950s Miracleman adventure.
Yeah.
And then there's a page that's 8 panels where it switches to the current day adventures, or it's actually Miracleman and his alter ego asleep, and he actually doesn't even know he's Miracleman at this point. He's dreaming. But this 8-page sequence starts with a tight shot of his face and keeps getting closer and closer until the last panel is not even just his eye, it's just his pupil. And the words that accompany the panels are all from Nietzsche, and you know right away this is something very different, and you know Nietzsche means it's a very different way of looking at what a superhuman being is in the world.
George, what did you think about reading today as it came out today? What's your review of the comic?
It took me a long time to really appreciate what it was. I think the audiences for comics now are broader, bigger, hopefully more sophisticated, and it would probably crush any minimal numbers it did back in the day now. Like if it actually came out now, I think it's like on par with anything like Preacher or Why the Last Man or the sales that Fables do. You know what I mean? It would definitely fit in.
To me, I mean, I've read virtually everything Alan Moore's written. And the only thing I can see that's dated in this, there's a couple times where there might be an awkward scene transition where like later, but for all we know that was added in by the editor. We don't really know. There's a couple of Alan Moore cliches where someone will start like a sentence and it'll end in the next scene with another character finishing the sentence, or there'll be like a visual metaphor for what they're talking about, which is an Alan Moore cliche. But at the time it was new, so that's fine. But really, what were you going to say?
I was going to say a lot of people do that kind of transition from scene to scene.
Sure.
It's become a really standard kind of transition, I think.
Yeah, but the dialogue is excellent. You know, you talk about Watchmen. Watchmen is more structured, but nothing's more structured than Watchmen. But with Miracleman, just the organization of the panels and the thought put into the transition, where sometimes you'll have a scene with 3 panels and it's really just one frame, just split up 3 ways, right? Or in the final scene when they actually break into the sort of headquarters where everything was done, instead of just showing Miracleman reacting to everything as it's happening, they actually have the scientists or whatever narrating like, well, then at 8:23, you know, the tape was rewound and then played again, and so we know that he saw this part. So they're actually explaining everything in the present as a flashback, and then everything you see is a flashback. Even the thought of doing it that way is just something different, right?
And the page layouts actually contribute to your understanding of the story. That's fairly new, didn't always happen. Yeah, I think the art and the writing go together in really useful and interesting ways.
Mm-hmm. Gary Leach, what do you think of Gary Leach's art?
I loved it. I mean, when it comes down to the art now, I find more and more that it now doesn't even become about my taste and if I like the drawings or not. The drawings are fine. I like them just fine, but it's the way that they work with the writer and work with the story, and that is the real skill, and it's all there. Like, it's beautiful.
A lot inkier, a lot more shadowy, right? A lot more realistic. At this point, what he had done was, especially with the scenes with his wife, where his wife is, there's actually a scene in the comic where they kind of go out, and she's like, so, okay, let's figure this out here. Like, she actually takes the time to, I'm going to time you flying.
Yeah.
And she's got like a little notepad. Okay, so you have, let's see, super strength. You're invulnerable. What about super breath? And he's like, super breath? Right. And I remember even reading that when I was a 13-year-old and just going, of course, to any outsider, this is ridiculous. You know, do you have a miracle dog too? You know, but these are all things that superheroes at that time all had.
They said it on Seinfeld, where it was like, well, Superman would be super funny, wouldn't he? I mean, he's super smart, he's super this, why wouldn't he be super funny? Yeah.
And now there are 2 precedents for this. One is Super Duper Man, which was a Mad Magazine parody. And there's another book called Super Folks that I believe a couple of the ideas were lifted for this. But in any case, the point is that even if Alan Moore did lift a couple things for this, just like he did for Watchmen, he executed it exquisitely.
Sure, and it's clearly him trying out a lot of ideas that he picks up on in Watchmen. And, you know, Watchmen is a lot tighter, but at its best, Miracleman does some really fascinating things. And, you know, I think if he hadn't tried out those ideas, it's hard for him to get to Watchmen.
Well, I think, for example, let's just say just the cliches of like, okay, here's the good guy, here's the bad guy. Introducing Mr. Cream with the sapphire teeth. Just the way that his character is introduced, he walks into the room and there's a guy who's been injured in the fight who's now deaf. And even just that scene, which I don't really want to spoil it, but the way that that scene plays out, never mind all the metafiction, just the way that that character is introduced, he's so frightening. When Miracleman's first introduced, when he comes back to life, the way that he's walking around, he's like, I can't remember, what's the word, I can't remember the magic word. And then he sees it reflected in a mirror, he sees atomic backwards, and he just, Komoda, and he just says it, and boom, he turns back into Miracleman, and it's so invigorating.
You've got a really creative, brilliant writer working, I would imagine, untethered by a company on a childhood favorite.
Sure. And this is now being reprinted by Marvel Comics. Number 1 will be coming out mid-January, and then they'll be following the whole series, and I'm sure they'll do trades, and maybe one day we'll even see a before Miracleman, right? Depending on the way things go. But anyway, if you haven't picked this up, this is your chance. It's coming out again. Please, like George said, I agree with you 100%. This is the velvet underground of superhero comics, and this is ground zero for the modern era. So there you go, Miracleman, formerly known as Marvel Man, coming from Marvel Comics this January. Please pick it up.